world of Utopia is quite a strange one because it was developed bit by bit. Finding components that I just liked, welding them to other components, building things around them that looked okay. And a funny thing happens when you're creating a place like that, because you don't think about the whole thing at once. You're just thinking about components. That looks good, that looks good. You put it all together and then you stand back. And it's actually quite strange looking, and it has a binding aesthetic, which has probably got something to do with my personality and taste. But at the same time, it looks weird to me. Like somehow familiar, but I don't know where those shapes and things come from exactly. Perhaps it's something to do with distant childhood memories. I mean, when I look at it now, I think maybe it's some deep-seated memories of playing with toys as a toddler.
I wanted to try and create something sort of otherworldly, sort of a sound that really could come from any time or place, but felt otherworldly at the same time. Yeah, so the Utopia scene was interesting because there was a question of how experimental do we make the scene? Do we really explore these strange-looking characters, or do we make it more about the story? In the end, we decided to make the music warmer and more melodic, so we put a guitar in, strings, so that the audience really felt the conclusion of the story.
The Utopia sequence, that was actually the first sequence that I worked on full-time with Sean. And it was a great starting point because it was always going to exist slightly on its own as a separate sequence. Sean again produced a great set of illustrations and reference sketches showing all of the creatures, the sort of new designs for the creatures in Utopia.
It was a big sequence to animate because there's so much going on, but I'll just animate it creature by creature, add in another one and another one, slowly until the whole scene was built with all the creatures, and it just became more and more rich and dynamic as it went along.
And each character actually presented a slightly different challenge because there's such a wide, varied selection of designs, styles of characters. The horn character, for example, discovered that it's sort of drastically tapering shape, very wide at one end and very narrow at the end. Sean's sort of texture reference for that was very specific because the scale of the surface texture had to stay constant throughout, not taper down and get narrow at the bottom. So that actually produced a very interesting challenge in terms of texture mapping.
The Utopia sequence is a really tricky design challenge. It was a collaboration between me and the Foley artist Adrian, and we were looking at this stuff and thinking to ourselves, well, how literal should we go? How non-literal should we go? And so we broke down each character in terms of what it was made of, the visual texture of the creature, and also the way it moved. And that necessarily informed its character and personality. And using those things as our guidelines, we then looked to our prop closets and pulled out all manner of stuff.
My favourite moment of the film is also my favourite picture in the book, or page in the book, and that's the goodbye sequence, and it was very important. I mean, I loved the whole leading up to, for obvious reasons, the big reveal of Utopia, but it was very important for me to be able to capture the pathos of the original picture. This, it's a sort of touching moment. I know a lot of people think that should have been the end of the film.
In terms of the lost thing going to a place where it belongs, at least where it's happy. We don't really know whether it belongs there or not. We just know that it's happy, and that's the main thing. And of course, the story could have ended there, but there's almost like a little epilogue about the boy reflecting on his life at the moment and how the whole story is merely a memory, and quite a distant memory, and one that's becoming increasingly harder to recollect. And you'll notice in the film that there is no music over the credits, because it's almost like we've had the dream of the story, like this magical memory of some sort of weird childhood experience, and then it drifts into this rather dull urban existence. And in some ways that is a transition from the film into the real world. Whether those creatures would have a life outside of the film is, anyone's guess. I quite like the fact that you just glimpse them briefly, and in your imagination, they have a whole other life. Like each creature might have a long origin story, like the Lost thing, that we don't know about, but we're free to imagine. And sometimes it's best not to say anything. It's more about them, to just show them briefly and let the audience kind of imagine things for themselves. And hopefully, I think, go away and take the concept of the Lost thing and apply it to a whole lot of other situations. So it's still not a clear concept, but it's something that's highly adaptable. Like anything could be a Lost thing.